Right, so I've recently realized I've actually never reviewed my M1 MacBook Air on this channel, which is pretty crazy because this has been my main machine for over 2 years, and so I do have plenty of thoughts. And I think this is the perfect time to review this because the M1 MacBook Air is pretty cheap nowadays. You can find this for £600 or £700/dollars, which is insane value. So some of you guys might be wondering, is this still worth getting in 2023? Well, let's dive into my thoughts. But short answer, hell yes. So let's begin with the design, and this I guess is the con of the M1 MacBook Air because this has the older MacBook design language, so you have no MagSafe, you have sharper corners, and you still have the wedge. And guys, I'll be honest, as someone who did use the M2 MacBook Air for a bit, yes, the new design is nice, but it's actually not that big of an upgrade. Once I finished reviewing the M2 MacBook Air, I went back to the M1 and I had no issues. In fact, I prefer the wedge with the M1 because it is more comfortable to type with. And so yeah, there are advantages to the older design, but either way, this design still feels modern and pretty fresh. And for those worried about the thick bezels, that's a non-issue because I'm mostly focused on the content on the display, so I rarely see the bezels, I forget about the bezel size, and it's really not a huge issue when using the machine. I will say though, I do prefer the rounder edges the M2 machine has because the sharp corners with the M1 version is easier to dent and scratch. I do have a few nicks around the corners, but again, that's because I obsess over things like this. For most regular consumers, that again is not going to be a massive issue. I will say though that if you do plan to get this in space grey or gold, be aware the colour can wear off, especially around the ports. I definitely have picked up on that, and I would actually get silver instead because that has no paint on the outside that wears off. So yes, I think durability wise, silver's the way to go. I only went with space grey because I got this from Apple refurbished, and you can't really pick the colour you want. You just buy the machine you want with the specs you wanted, and silver wasn't available on the refurb stores, so yes, I'm stuck with space grey for this machine, but if I do plan to buy a new MacBook, I'm gonna go for silver. And for those worried about the thickness and the weight of this, compared to the much more compact M2 model, don't worry because this M1 Air is still a very portable laptop. The thickness and the weight's are non-issues, so yes, do not worry about this. And by the way, would like to remind you guys, like this video and subscribe for more content like this. It would be appreciated. Now moving on to the display, this is very similar to the M2 MacBook Air because they're both LCD, they both have similar resolution. The only big differences are the brightness and the size of the display. But that again does not make a massive difference. As I said, I did review the M2 MacBook Air, but I went back to the M1 variant and the display basically felt the same size. That 0.3-inch upgrade really does not give you that much more real estate, and this 13.3-inch panel is still perfectly fine. Also, the brightness is a non-issue because 400 nits is plenty good if you're going to be using this MacBook indoors. I rarely go outside with my MacBook, so I don't need higher brightness. It's plenty bright for indoor usage. And by the way, I don't have a monitor with this because for video editing, I find the screen on this perfectly fine for my usage. The colors are great. The size, as I said, is fine for my use. So yeah, this is a fantastic panel. And yes, it does not have the bells and whistles like mini LED 120Hz, but I don't need that. I just need a reliable, good display, and this MacBook Air offers that. So yeah, you should be fine with the display on this. I will say though, the glass on top of the display is very hard to keep clean because dust easily sticks onto it. There's also the smudges on top of the webcam because that's where I place my finger when opening the MacBook. And yes, I do use a microfiber cloth to regularly wipe the display, but it's actually very hard to clean because the marks of you wiping on the display stays there. So I use a bit of water to wipe that off. And yeah, overall it takes me like 20 minutes to clean this, which is a bit of a faff. I do wish it was easier to clean. But hey, maybe this is a sign that I need to upgrade to Apple's polishing cloth. Maybe that's a better experience. But yes, apart from that, the display's been great. Now let's move on to the camera and mics. And yes, I know the webcam on this is 720p, which on paper does seem like a big weakness. But let me tell you guys, when it comes to regular webcam usage, e.g. for Zoom calls, this webcam's plenty good. I doubt many are going to complain about the resolution if you give it enough light, but if you do care about having a higher res webcam, do remember that you can use your iPhone as your webcam now using continuity camera. Now I've not played with this because I do actually use my Sony camera for video calls, but I can see in a pinch continuity camera being pretty clutch. But the fact I use my Sony camera should tell you guys that if you do care about the resolution of your webcam, just plug in a camera instead. There's plenty of cameras that already have software that turns cameras into webcams when plugged in. And so yeah, the 720p webcam on this is a total non-issue because if you do care about resolution, you do have alternatives. Now the mics thankfully are rock solid, as is the case with any MacBook. It sounds crisp and it's good enough for calls. And here's a quick mic test for you guys, and as you might be able to see, the mics on this are very solid. And for those wondering about the speakers, they are terrific. In fact, I would say they're better than the M2 Air because they are front facing, whereas the M2 Air has speakers hidden under the hinge. And so yes, I'm very happy with the speakers. They're perfectly fine for video editing and for watching content. It's a very immersive experience. And yes, I know the M2 Air does have speakers that actually have spatial audio support without the use of AirPods, and honestly, as far as I remember, that did not make a massive difference. The M1 Air speakers are still top tier. Pretty soon, I'm assuming, with the Mac Pro, but now Ross Young tells us that plan has been cancelled and we're not going to see this launch. Now, moving to the keyboard and trackpads, this will be a short segment because I have literally had no issues. The Magic Keyboard's been reliable, I love the travel on it, it's very comfortable to use, and the trackpad is ginormous. I love the size, I love the haptics, and the fact you can click anywhere on the trackpads, that's pretty neat. And on the whole, Apple's nailed the keyboard and trackpad experience with their MacBooks. Now this does use Wi-Fi 6 and Bluetooth 5.0, which are pretty new specs, but I will say I did have some initial Wi-Fi issues when I got this machine, but thankfully that's been sorted. So maybe that was a software bug, but anyways, Bluetooth wise, it's been fantastic. Connection with AirPods has been rock solid. However, I will say that pairing wise, as has been the case with all MacBooks, it's not as seamless as it is on iPhones, but the connection itself is super reliable. Now, another possible con some might mention about the M1 Air is the ports. You only have 2 ports on this machine, which of course pales in comparison to new Macs and other laptops. However, I'll be honest, 2 ports are enough for my usage. I usually use 1 port for charging, and then the other ports can be used for the mic for videos, and also to plug in my SD card reader. So yes, it's not a huge issue. Of course, I would love more ports, but I can live with 2 ports. And yes, I know some hate the dongle life, hence why Apple gave us legacy ports back on the higher-end MacBook Pros, but I'm not going to go out and spend $2,000 on those Pro machines when I could just buy a dongle that's $10 and use that with my M1 MacBook Air that works perfectly fine. So yes, I don't care about dongles, I'm fine with that, and 2 ports is good enough for my use. And if I'm being honest, most general consumers buying this machine are going to be very happy with 2 ports. They're most likely only going to be using ports to charge the MacBook and might occasionally plug in peripherals. And so yes, 2 ports is completely fine. Now you do have biometrics on this with Touch ID, which has been flawless, no issues, always works. Obviously, I would love to see Face ID because it would be nice that as soon as you open the MacBook, Face ID unlocks the machine, but either way, Touch ID has been great. Now let's talk about the main part of the MacBook Air experience, which of course is the performance. I have the base binned version of the M1, so technically this is the slowest Apple Silicon chip Apple sells, and I paired that with 16 gigs of RAM because I do edit videos, so the additional RAM was needed, and thankfully I've had no RAM issues. And also I did get 512 gigs of storage. I do need more storage for video files. But do remember, unlike the M2 MacBook Air, the base M1 version with 256 gigs of storage does not have a slow SSD. It's the same speeds as the high storage variants. And so if you're a light user, you can get away with the base version because that should be plenty good for watching content, browsing the internet, emailing people, doing Zoom calls, and writing notes. And I will say, as someone who pushes this machine on a regular basis by editing videos for around 2 hours per day, I've had no issues. It's been perfect 99% of the time, with that 1% being the 1 or 2 times in the last 2 years it has lagged or freezed, but that happens with most devices, nothing's perfect, and the fact a base MacBook has been perfect for my usage 99% of the time is pretty crazy. And yes, I know my videos are pretty simple to be honest, but remember back in the Intel days, the MacBook Air would instantly overheat for the simplest of edits on Final Cut. And so the fact I've been reliably editing on this for 2 years straight with absolutely no issues is pretty amazing because this is a fanless Mac, it has no fan inside to cool it, and yet the machine stays super cool, so yes, I am very happy with the performance, it's still fantastic. And yes, I know the M2 Air does have faster export speeds due to the new encoders and decoders, but I'll be honest, I could care less about that. I care about the speed and reliability when I'm doing the edit, and I've had no issues. So yeah, the M1 Air still performs like a champ. So let's talk about software and support. So I did finally get Ventura on this after using Big Sur for a year and a half, and I have to say Ventura's been just as fast as Big Sur for me on this MacBook. No slowdowns, no planned obsolescence from Apple, and regarding software support, I genuinely think we could see 10 years of support in total, so of course, we've already had 2 years. So we have 8 years remaining, and that's plenty enough for most users. Most are using MacBooks for 5 years minimum, so yes, you're going to be covered software-wise for many, many years. Do not worry about support. And because M2 is so similar to M1, I doubt it's going to get that many more years of support. At the very most, it could get 1 additional year, but that's about it. Now finally, let's get to battery life, because this by far is what's aged the worst with this MacBook. And it makes sense because batteries naturally degrade over time, and so at the time of filming, I have 88% battery health after 2 years of use, which I know sounds pretty good. Apple, I believe, says you should have 80% of your battery health after 2 years of usage. So I am well above the average, but the thing is, I don't unplug this machine very often. I keep it plugged in 90% of the week. And in fact, I only have 179 cycles on this machine, and so the health being this low is not that great. And it's why I want Apple to give us a manual charge limiter within macOS, because while macOS does occasionally limit the charge on the Mac to 80% when it's been plugged in for prolonged use, that's not always the case. I wish I could just manually force the machine to always do this, and if that was a feature, the battery health would have been much better after 2 years of use. But it's not the biggest deal breaker in the world because I am using the machine plugged in most of the time, so battery life is not that important. But for those wondering why I got a Mac if it's stationary for the most part, it's because for those times I need to do work on the go. I want that flexibility with my machine. I don't want an iMac that's stuck in one place, and so occasionally when I do use the MacBook on the go, I do notice the battery life not being as good as it used to be. For example, back in the day when I got this, I would be ending days with 90% after doing 2 hours of constant editing, but nowadays I'm seeing it dip to 70%, so that is a big reduction. But then again, it's not a massive issue because I'm rarely completely draining the machine. But honestly, that's the only issue I can think of, and that applies to any product. Lithium-ion batteries are not fantastic. And so yes, apart from that, I have thoroughly enjoyed my experience with this MacBook. I love it. It's one of the best products I've ever purchased, and I can still recommend many get this in 2023. And yeah, make sure to look out for refurbished and used deals on the M1 Air because you can find these for pretty cheap, and it's going to be tough to find a similar package on the Windows sides that does everything so well. So yes, go ahead and buy the M1 Air. This is still the best MacBook to buy for regular consumers and those who are beginning to do creative work but don't want to spend a ton of cash on a MacBook Pro. But honestly, even as someone who's been running a channel for 2 years with this MacBook, I'm gonna stick to the base MacBooks because they have plenty power for my use, they're not that expensive compared to the Pros, and so eventually when I do upgrades, I'm gonna be getting another MacBook Air because these are very solid machines. But yes, bang for your buck wise, you can't beat the M1 Air, definitely buy it. And if you have any more questions regarding this machine, let me know in the comments. Anyways, thank you for watching guys, make sure to like and subscribe for the latest Apple news and rumours, and on that note, I'll see you guys in the next one.